Good afternoon, and welcome to our panel, Higher Ed Projects, Goals, Challenges, and Lessons Learned from the Year. Today, we are going to talk about best practices and lessons learned from current P3 projects as to both construction and operations, including risk transfer, balance, developing performance specifications, risk allocation, and dispute resolutions in a manner that is flexible and workable for both parties to develop a long-lasting partnership and a successful project. My name's Jennifer Bales Drake. I am a shareholder with Becker. We have offices throughout the state of Florida, Washington, D.C., and New York City. I am located in sunny South Florida here in Fort Lauderdale. I'm vice chair of our P3 practice group and have done P3s for many years, long before they were even called P3s. And I always like to mention that I have the honor of being part of the very successful LSU project, phase project that Jeremy also has worked on. My panelists are Jeremy Doss with RISE, Angela Clayton with Plenary, and Dave Evers with Johnson Controls. Sorry, but Dave was having computer problems, so you only will hear his voice. It's a shame you can't see his face, but he's here. And I'm going to let each panelist briefly give their own introduction, and we're going to start with Angela.
Thanks, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Angela Clayton, and I'm the group head of our project delivery division here at Plenary, responsible for all of our social P3 assets, either in construction or in operations across North America.
Jeremy?
Good afternoon. I'm Jeremy Doss, Senior Vice President with RISE Real Estate. Been here at RISE just at 20 years now. I lead our own campus P3 pursuits and development. Great to be here today with you all.
Thank you, Jeremy. And Dave?
Good afternoon. Dave Evers. I am the Engineering Director for P3 Pursuits in North America for Johnson Controls. Although I spend more of my time on the pursuit side, we do spend a lot of time in the operational and construction side, coordinating those activities within the more general team.
All right, welcome everybody. Angela, we're going to start off with you. One of the most important aspects for the success of a project, both as to construction and operation, is the risk transfer balance. I'm going to ask all three of you a question concerning this, again, starting with Angela. Angela, what suggestions would you offer to project sponsors to ensure the right risk transfer balance to ensure successful transition?
Sure, yeah. So we have two higher ed P3 projects that reached substantial completion this year. There was the Purdue University Student Housing Project. So that's two buildings, about 1,300 beds, 350,000 square feet. So that was finished July of this year. And then we also wrapped up the third phase of the University of California Merced project. That was 13 buildings, a mix of housing, academic, and min, about 800,000 square feet. And that was finished in June. And so we have quite a bit of experience in the higher ed P3 space. From what we've learned in executing our projects, when it comes to risk transfer, I think, nothing earth-shattering here, but I think it truly comes down to which party is best positioned to manage the risk. And on both of our projects, I think they got the risk allocation right, which just allowed us to be successful. So, revenue risk in both cases was retained by the university with regards to student housing. Permitting and utilities risk was joint between both parties, depending on which jurisdiction we were dealing with, and retail risk was retained by the university. So, those are some of the more sticky items that we tend to see, and they seem to really work in our favor. We didn't run into any issues along the project. I guess another thing I would say is key as far as specifically as transitioning is just making sure that the authority understands, the university understands what their structure is going to look like, both during construction, so the redevelopment project, but also into operations, in just planning, 3-4 years ahead to make sure that they have the outline of what their organization is going to look like. So they're, we're able to build those relationships early on, and they're prepared for transitioning into operations.
Okay, thank you. Jeremy, what are some of the key components for your successful projects in the area of risk balance and building a successful partnership?
Well, I think just looking back over the years, and things have definitely evolved. But the most successful projects have been where the project was reasonable from the onset, that you had great participation across the board at the host institution at the beginning of the project, that everyone understood the overall goals of the P3, and it wasn't just necessarily their silo, but they understood that it had to be a balanced approach from financing to operations to the cost of construction. And if that core group can work through all of those items together and kind of be involved from the very beginning, I believe everyone understands. It kind of builds a level of trust and confidence in each other that just sets the project up for success, as each one of those, hurdles that come along the way as design develops, as pricing comes in, as financing and cost of capital comes in, we can quickly adapt to it and find that right balance to make the project the utmost successful.
Dave, what considerations do you look at to assist your clients in balancing risk transfer and value for money when establishing like a payment, performance and payment or pay mechanism scheme?
Well, to second what Angela had indicated, that you need to have a balance on risk, where you put risk control where it's most readily controlled. If it's revenue, if it's construction cost, if it's operations, the responsible party should be the person who really has the buttons and levers to affect change there. So that's a key consideration in establishing that basis. The next piece is that in terms of PayMech in particular, this might sound a little bit simple, but the PayMech should be associated with motivation, not as what I might call business insurance risk. So a PayMech, penalty or bonus, as the case may be, should be a motivator, not a penalty per se. When it begins to look like business interruption insurance, you look at the pricing for the service provider, you look at the incentives, it tends to get, or can begin to look upside down, where the cost and the risk reward and the value for money is imbalanced. So that would be a key point. Again, making the penalties or the PayMech associated with a motivation rather than a penalty.
So along those lines, and again, I'm going to open this up to each one of you, because you each are talking about a concept of deciding who needs what risk and who needs what buttons and all of that. I'm going to ask a real simple one. We're going to go back around in the same order, and I'm going to start with you, Angela, because you were talking about your two projects. When you sit down, who usually guides those questions, and how do you assist your clients in determining how you're going to determine the balance of the risk, or educate them, that type of thing?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think there's so many different parties throughout the P3 process that can influence that. And so we as bidders generally only get to provide input unless if there's a market sounding procurement, then we will take the opportunity to provide our thoughts on if we think there's risks that are best managed by the university. But once the procurement's going, our opportunity to provide that feedback is really limited to the commercially confidential meetings and through the request for information process. And so, we tend to rely pretty heavily on the advisors who are guiding the authorities and universities to provide them with some recommendations with regards to risk. But certainly we have pretty strong opinions on what risk we're able to manage and how we would price different risk profiles. But other than that, once it's in procurement, we just tend to kind of deal with what we're offered, or if it's something that we're quite strongly opposed to, then, we'll indicate that accordingly with the process.
Right. Jeremy.
Yeah, so I think one thing, obviously we have, Jennifer, we have the procurement phase, the RFQ and the RFP, and let's take LSU for example, since you were across the table from us as we were working through that and responding. We did have a base case kind of, hey, here's what we're pivoting from, here's what we feel like in our vacuum offers the best value, just knowing the information that we had. Now, once we did kind of get down further into the procurement process, and even some after award, we had that base case, but then we could say, hey, the market's changing. Let's line up the pros and cons across the different financing options. Now, you may have a tax-exempt bond function here, and within that, you have a project-based financing that really puts the project at arm's reach from the university, or you have more tied to the university's balance sheet, which in turn does increased risk for the host institution, but lowers that cost of capital. So it changes the overall dynamics of the project. Along with that, you have some equity financing options. You had some bank financing options. We looked quickly at the pros and cons of those. We're able to maybe rule those out, focus in on, okay, let's get down to 2 or 3 and ultimately determine, hey, what's the ultimate, the best value, which comes with its set of risk parameters for each party, for the school, for the developer. In that case, at LSU, we're doing the facility management. LSU was extending the residence life function there. So we need to blend that into the overall kind of SWOT analysis before we quickly determine the path to really drive home. And then that kind of controlled all of the documents and the agreements and the ultimate, closing. And now operations to date. But I think it's really a case-by-case basis. You've got to understand, hey, where are you at, host institution, with your needs, with your credit profile, and let's go towards best value.
And one of the things we learned from this LSU project was a phase, and so you had to pivot through different areas and different years, is the fact that the university got all their stakeholders together way before even the private, the like RISE came and
right.
And the people that were bidding on the project, so that not only did the different aspects of the university know what they needed, they were able to assess what risks they needed to transfer and what they needed to keep. So one of the takeaways here is, as you listen to these professionals, is that if you're a university, the more communication you can have amongst yourself and then with the participants, you're going to really come up with a more successful project, because you may think you absolutely need to offshift this risk and it doesn't work when you start listening to everybody. Dave, what considerations do you look at to?
Well, to this point, as well as the previous, I would emphasize that things need to be addressed early. Things can be fixed by reasonable people in discussion. Once the documentation starts coming together, it's a little bit harder. Once the different consortia have put together documentation, certain elements of design and structure that met original criteria, it's just much harder to change. So if it's not free early, it's at a low cost. As the documents come together, it gets progressively harder, more complicated, expensive, and more lawyers perhaps to figure out, and that just doesn't benefit anyone. The problems are going to occur. Nothing's perfect. So the sooner you can address them, the better off everyone's going to be. In the context of approach, there's any number of approaches we see in North America, because there are different types of procurements. The documentation is different. The paperwork is different. Sometimes we're provided with complete documentation, sometimes less so. And we or other members of bidding parties have to, maybe fill in and provide some guidance. We would look to different metrics within the industry to see what is expensive or not expensive, or typical or not. And in many cases, we'll come back, and this would be perhaps on a confidential basis in a confidential meeting, is describe the dollars involved. And it's as simple as, did you know if you ask this, it will cost that? And there's a fair number of times when the answer back is, no, we actually really didn't think about that. You know, we're in the education business. We're not in the FM business. And yeah, we didn't really think of it that way. Thank you. And then we can all move on. And again, to go to my initial point, the sooner you can do that, the better off everybody's going to be. And the best value is going to come out of it.
I totally agree. And I will tell you, from a drafting point of view, the more the parties talk and the more you guys come together, the easier it is to draft the documents you need. Now, we can't be on a panel in 2020 without talking about COVID-19. So we're going to pivot to the impact, because I think all three of you have had some experience. Jeremy, I've got a two-part question, so we're going to start out with the construction side. How has COVID-19 affected your P3s as to the construction aspect of your current project?
Well, it came on quickly. I could definitely say that in March, with the multiple projects we had under construction. Fortunately, along with our project management teams, we had some great general contractors involved in those projects that were very proactive, although this was, atypical times, to say the least. Quickly implemented plans, started doing temp checks and locking down the job sites. As these universities began to close down, we quickly saw the opportunity to say, hey, no more carpooling, no more off-site parking, or how can we adapt to that? We were able to, allow parking closer to the job sites. We started to monitor some of our subcontractors. If they were traveling from long distances, we started to ask questions and get feedback on where they were actually staying after hours to really get out in front of that. We fortunately were able to deliver everything on time this fall. We felt like that was a huge lift, and we got across the goal line. Now we're going back now and really taking our time in the middle of social distancing on these campuses and reviewing those deliveries and making sure, the warranty period, we're kind of having doing quarterly warranty walks and punch lists and such. But COVID definitely affected us and taught us a lot of lessons on the construction side that I think we're going to implement for this point forward.
And what about on the operations side? The ones that are up and running?
Yeah. So operations kind of the same way, a lot of different properties out there. It was quick implementation. Our operations team did take advantage of the fact that all of a sudden we had some vacant units from, let's say, April 1 until August 1. So we were able to, you had to go in there and make sure your HVAC and such were set properly, but it gave us the opportunity to go in and say, hey, what can we learn? We had a lot more time to turn the units, obviously. And then when it came back to moving in, we learned a lot from the operations side, doing the touchless, contactless move-ins, doing a lot of prep work up front, and then all the feedback from the students and our partners has really been positive. And within our team here has been really positive in how much more efficient it's been. So we learned a lot from that. So, a bit of a silver lining per se in construction and the management side.
Do you think that's going to have continued impact? And if so, about how long?
Well, I think a lot of the things will have continued impact just because it's working. It showed us, of ways to work harder, work smarter versus harder. But yeah, and then on other trades and things that we picked up during this time, I think we will continue to implement those. It's going to change the generation of students too, and the sensitivities are going to be different for the students and their parents alike. So it's a post-COVID. It's going to be a post-COVID environment without a doubt.
Angela, how has COVID-19 impacted your projects, and how has risk transfer been handled?
Yeah, so our experience has been pretty similar to Jeremy's in that, our both of our general contractors, we had Webcor on Merced and Gilbane on Purdue, just responded fantastically. Both of our projects were far enough along that we didn't have any impacts with regards to material, but there were some pretty significant resource impacts when they started implementing some of the restrictions and social distancing and the additional sanitation and whatnot. Now, talking about risk transfer, thankfully, on both of our projects, the project agreements contemplated a pandemic as a relief event. So the contractors didn't have to worry about compensation. They were able to continue focusing on construction and getting the jobs done on time. And just looking at the impact, our project in California slowed down for about a week, and then they were able to kind of ramp back up. Whereas Purdue, there really wasn't a significant impact in productivity. They were very responsive, like Jeremy said, very, very proactive in kind of getting their measures in place in order to make sure that they were able to continue with construction. A funny story on Purdue with regards to ongoing operations. We have all of the students are still in residence and currently doing classes from their rooms, and we have motion sensors throughout the building. And because they're so focused when they're studying, and especially when they're doing exams, the lights are shutting off while they're in the middle of their exam. And because of the proctor system, they can't get up and turn them back on. So it's funny because it's just those little things that seem pretty minor, but just having to completely, adjust the way that the space is used. Occupancy is another thing. They're not occupying any of the triple occupancy rooms. They're just doing singles and doubles and just kind of manage, in addition to all the cleaning and sanitation, just really trying to manage the way that the space is used differently.
Do you foresee universities wanting to have dramatically different designs now, or do you think they'll wait?
Yeah, it's a great question and something that we've been looking at. I think it's inevitable. Personally, I think we're going to see some pretty significant design changes, both on the functional side, so mechanical, electrical, whatnot, but also architecturally. I think we'll see more single occupancy room, more space, and I think it's going to have a pretty dramatic impact on design going forward.
Dave, what do you think? Do you think it'll have an impact on future design?
Well, this is definitely a Dave opinion. It's not an opinion of the organization or anyone else.
Noted.
What's that? I'm sorry?
Oh, I was just kidding. I said noted disclaimer on your part.
Is there's a lot of differences in how this particular pandemic is being handled across the country and maybe within states, and certainly within mine. I was speaking to one of our operational staff in a Midwestern university, actually quite large university, and their students are in class. They're socially distant. They have isolation protocols, and they're managing kids and young adults rather in class and doing quite nicely at it. I happen to have my youngest in a university here in the Midwest doing it the same way. So I think there's a lot of different approaches to this. This pandemic is of a specific specification that it happens to not have is statistically as serious, and I'm trying not to be insensitive of that with this age group, and we don't know what's going to happen next. So I think, to me, the jury's out on this a little bit until we have more information. Going back to my specific example in my theme or our theme of collaboration, I was speaking to one of our operational folks, again, major university, and he was speaking to the fact that it created a certain amount of work, actually a lot of work for him, particularly as it relates to cleaning. But the university was so forward thinking of it, or in this regard, in terms of how they were addressing the students, how they were separating the students, the protocols for the students. It didn't just flow down to the operator as we are. There's protocols for moving students from room to room. They had isolation protocols. They've increased the cleaning within the public areas significantly, where there's literally people walking around with spray bottles, doing all the high touch services. And it worked out magnificently, as this gentleman described, specifically because the university looked at this as a partnership. It wasn't our problem. It was something we all had to reasonably address, as no one was going to win otherwise. So that's as a specific example.
One other quick thing, Jennifer.
I'm going to give you, Jeremy.
On design changes, I think one of the leading things, we're definitely tweaking the units, looking at that. You're right. Triples won't make it. But along those lines, the dorms, and we know almost every campus has the cash cow dorm from the late 60s, early 70s. It's hard to take them offline. They have no debt. And they're lower price point. But now I think this event, we're hearing more and more momentum is picking up there. Those are not near as attractive at whatever price point. There's too many kids sharing a bathroom and such. So now parents are saying, I'll pay up for the new suites and whatnot. That's what we're doing at LSU, as you know, Jennifer. And, you know, at Appalachian State, we're also working through a full replacement of all of their dormitory housing. So I think we're really going to see even more momentum on that side as far as, you know, the dorms and just a de-densifying campus.
And more than likely, universities are going to be turning to P3s just because of the climate.
Just the speed, you know, the overall speed and the value, and then just a holistic approach.
Right. And just quickly on that, do you see any P3 financing markets and options changing because of the pandemic, or?
Well, no, as we just heard on the last block of sessions and getting feedback, and that's what we're living right now. The bond market is definitely in turmoil. It's allowing some other options to become the best, you know, a better value. And you know, there again, it really comes down to the institution's goals and current position and what's important. There's definitely some reordering in the best value there, but I think right now it's so fluid. Once we get a vaccine, the dust is going to settle, and then I think we can kind of say, okay, where do we go from here? But I think being open-minded, having the confidence in your team, working closely together really allows the overall team to be able to say, where's our best value? How quickly can we move? Is it worth it? You know, let's do it or not do it. You know, what's the pros and cons of each?
Right. So now we're going to switch gear in our last 15 minutes or so. We're going to leave some time open for questions at the end if any come in. But we're going Dave, how would you describe the balance necessary to achieve maximum value for money in a P3 between like specification and innovation?
Well, in the big point is to understand what your requirements are. Describe what you want or the outcome you're looking for, and don't leave it open. Earlier, we were speaking to, you know, what the provider can risk manage to, what they control versus what the customer can or the user can control. But we have to be told. So if a multi-story building is a requirement, write that down. If it's a single-story building, write that down. But don't tell the supplier how to do it. Make sure you are very specific about what you want or what outcome you're looking for, but don't tell the provider how to do it. And then through the process, those items can be refined and the designs can come to a solution that is going to make everybody happy. We've had discussions internally, and everybody's spoken about at some point in their life about comparing apples and oranges. And I was on a meeting some months ago in the summer, and they said, well, apples and oranges and perhaps a John Deere. And I kind of sat back and I thought, you're right. We're not comparing fruit here. We're actually, it's hard to say what we're comparing here. And it makes it very difficult for people like myself on what I'll call the pursuit side or the development side to get the user what they want if it is laid out in insufficient detail. The requirements aren't there. And again, if you can't tell me what you want, tell me what outcome you're looking for. Tell any provider what outcome you're looking for, and then the public sector will hopefully fill that need.
Mute myself here. Angela, I know that when I draft documents in a project, we always make sure that there's mechanisms for continued open communication so issues can be worked on collaboratively. So as they arise, they can be taken care of. What has been your experience in dispute resolution process with your project?
Well, Jennifer, we appreciate all the work that you and the other firms put into articulating a very clear dispute resolution process. I'm happy to say that on both of our projects, we've not had to use it. And we're actually really proud about that fact, especially on Merced, considering the size and duration and complexity of that particular project. And I think it comes back to just the strength of the partnership that we had with the university. In both cases, the teams, the redevelopment teams were just phenomenal to deal with. They were, to Jeremy's point, they were engaged right from the start. To Dave's point, they focused on output-based specifications, so they gave the bidders the flexibility to come up with a solution that met their needs but wasn't too prescriptive. And sure, we had issues. I mean, you're going to have issues on any project, but in both and every circumstance, we were able to come to the table and get to resolution amicably without having to use the dispute resolution process. And I give full credit to our partners on the university side and also our partners within the consortium.
So just a quick follow-up, and not necessarily with those two. Have you had experiences where you've had to use the dispute resolutions and it's mostly lack of communication? Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so unfortunately we have, and the process is a little bit different. So from our experience, more common on US P3s for there to be a dispute resolution board that is established and needs to help to resolve some issues. We do have some experience working through a more structured process where there's adjudication, arbitration, eventually litigation, and it is painful, and it does ultimately come down to breakdowns in communication, either whether that's within the consortia or with the client, or just a misalignment of expectations, where, to Dave's earlier point, the client was expecting to get a certain outcome, but it wasn't clearly articulated within the output specifications, and so we end up having some back and forth about that, and so it's they're helpful. They're helpful provisions to have in the agreement, because unfortunately sometimes they're necessary, and in every case we've been able to work through the dispute resolution process. It hasn't had an impact on a project where we've had to stop work or anything like that, but obviously our preference is always to try to resolve the issues amicably if we can.
Okay, Jeremy, like we've already discussed, LSU was extremely collaborative. There are a lot of different phases to it. I know you've worked on quite a few other projects. Kind of go through your experience, both whether it's been with dispute resolution mechanisms that are standard set in the documents, or how you've gotten to places of resolution without having to use the mechanisms of like
Sure.
she was talking about of
Sure.
arbitration?
So I think our industry has gotten really, mature and seasoned, and folks have been around. And so, 10, 15 years ago, we would go in when we initiated a relationship or first met a school. It was like, now what do you do and how do you do it? And why would I do that? But now we've come such a long way. P3s are mainstream. We're core campus. We're able to do this. Folks understand them. So you're over that hump and you're more down to, hey, what value does your team bring? What do you bring to the table? So with that, I think all of that history has very informed. We've all learned. We've heard about the horror stories and such, and so now we navigate around. And I think all of the documents that are out there are pretty much structured in a way that we can navigate it. And then we just understand that it takes relationship, it takes trust, it takes building that. And then when something comes up, you never even start to get close to that, into what did that dispute resolution say, because we can work through it. We see it coming. There's a way to work through it because we know each other and such. I think that's so important. So knock on wood, I'm not even familiar with the structure, but I know it's kind of been unchanged for probably 10 years of, in the worst case scenario, what would happen. So I think it just comes with opportunities like this. I mean, at conferences, you see familiar faces, you trust folks broadly from that, and then when you actually get to know them personally, even more so. So it just really helps that we've kind of grown up all together and we have a mature market.
Right. So, and everybody's going to be real busy from this point forward, right? So
That's right.
We've got about 6 or 7 minutes left, so I'm gonna follow up and I'm gonna go with all three of you with this on kind of a lessons learned, and we're gonna start with Dave. What lessons have been learned over the years and this past year, Dave?
Well, I guess we're speaking a lot to relationships, and I'll call it filling the bank account. Is from both sides of the arrangement, you need to make compromises. You need to do what's right, regardless of what's written in the documentation. And the earlier you can do that, the better off you're going to be. If we have a nasty outcome 5 years into the agreement that has maybe worked its way through the system, again, nobody benefits. I've referred to that earlier. But the big piece from my perspective in learning to execute these is to begin early, do an effective transition when we're going from construction to operations, make sure everybody understands what is going on, make sure everyone understands the agreement. If the customer doesn't have a team of lawyers and doesn't understand the agreement, it's really to everyone's a benefit to step through and make sure everyone understands, because if it comes up later, it's going to be much, much more difficult to deal with than if it's addressed early and knowledgeably.
Thank you. Angela, what lessons have you learned?
Yeah, I have to echo Dave's comments, and I know we talked about this quite a bit already as far as collaboration and the importance of a partnership, but I can't stress enough how fundamental that is. And so one of the approaches that we take is that we have a partnering session shortly after financial close, bring all the key stakeholders into the same room, and it's a bit of a level setting of expectations, how we're going to communicate, how issues are going to get resolved. So we do that early on just to flush out any potential issues or make sure everybody has a common understanding. And then, we'll check in and do a relationship health check every 6 months just to kind of see how things are going. And there's been a few times where things have started off going a bit sideways. You got new players not used to the model, or new clients not used to the model, and we need to bring everybody back to the table and get everybody focused on the end game. So I mean, it really putting the time and energy into getting those partnerships and relationships built and set up front. And if you have any turnover of key individuals throughout the process, getting back and doing that again, it is worth its time and energy in gold. It will pay off inevitably.
Totally agree. Jeremy, you've got a couple of minutes to wrap this up here.
So lessons learned, I think overall is, and we know this, but sometimes you need to be reminded of it. It's to be proactive versus reactive and be always adapting. I mean, it's the reason why this is a young industry, or was it used to be a relatively young industry, and now, we're all getting older now. But anyway, I mean, you see new ideas come in. You see you're trying to do the same thing over and over again, and then new ideas come in, and all of a sudden that market share shifts. But I think COVID has just shown us how quickly, things were right there underneath us, efficiencies and things. So I think the lessons learned is just, hey, let's learn from this. We've learned a lot of things, but let's continue to remind ourselves, how there's inefficiencies around, and how our population and who we're serving, the students, are changing every year. We need to be studying these generations, what's important to them, what's not important to them. And we've seen from, needing a parking space per bed to almost no parking, and now, having so much square footage per student was really important. But now students can immerse themselves in their devices and put a headset in and not need as much space. But then you have the virus come on, and you need social distancing, so you have to pair that together. But I think you have to be always learning, and so that is the lesson learned. The lesson remind here is to always be challenging yourself on a deal basis. I think even though a deal's penciling and everything seems to be great, smooth sailing all the way to closing, something like this can disrupt everything. So even if your budget's working, even if your operating expenses are working, you need to be challenging those throughout. You need to come up with cost-saving options or value management log to understand, hey, what do we have in HVAC? What do we have in flooring? What do we have in appliances? And all of those things, because all of a sudden the financial markets blow up, you need levers to pull. You need to understand, hey, can we cut our cable out, which we do now, but can we cut our cable TV out, go all streaming, whatever it may be? You can really fine tune that overall performance very quickly if you have those in place versus being reactive and scrambling. So some important lessons learned, being reminded.
Right. And I know that throughout this whole thing, no matter what topic we're talking about, we've talked about partnership, communication, and collaboration. And as this industry matures, you guys can give your 2 cents on this. I think that that's one thing that you see with the most successful projects, that there's open communication from the financing to the, from the sponsor to the financing to the principals to the private sector. It's extremely important on all levels. And I want to thank everybody for attending the panel. We probably have time for one question if there is any, but I don't see any. And
covered it all.
Otherwise, we're going to sign out here. No questions.
Great.
Just got the memo. So thanks everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you all. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank
Take
you.
care.